Good morning. Hemshech Chaim Beis at the end is based on the Maamorei of the Alter Rebbe Chanukah and elaborated upon the Mittler Rebbe, and that's what middle of learning, the Mittler Rebbe's Maimer. We are on page, top of page 373. And the Mittler Rebbe is explaining, which is based again on the Alter Rebbe's Maimer, the process through which the divine soul is able to inform, educate, train, tame, and ultimately harness the animal soul that is on its own immersed and focused on its own self-interest to love God. V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha. But v'ahavta does not come in a vacuum. That comes after Shema, which in turn comes after the two blessings of Yotzer and Ahavas, which in turn comes after Psukei D'Zimra. So the Mittler Rebbe, in a methodical way, has been explaining what tefillah does. So this is, of course, very valuable because we all daven every day, but one's supposed to daven. But here, one of the places, Chassidus talks about davening many places, but it's one of the places where he organizes how tefillah actually serves as an Aveda Shebelev. That's what it's called. Ezo Aveda Shebelev Zui Tefillah. What is the service of the heart? Called emotional conditioning. And we know emotional conditioning lies at the heart, at the essence of who we are in our relationships with each other, with God, with ourselves. So essentially the core of all psychology is emotional conditioning, emotional development. So we have a time-tested and timeless tool called prayer, tefillah, that exercises and works on these emotions, and namely, that the emotions should grow from and mature, instead of it being the childish, selfish emotions of just your own survival and your own interest, they become emotions that are connected to things that are transcendent, we call the love of God. But I have to spell it out in simple English because loving God is very confusing to many. What does that mean? It really means is the antithesis of loving yourself, meaning that your life is not just driven by self-interest, it's driven by a higher purpose. But that takes work, and that's Avedas HaTefillah. So if you prayed properly, Psukei D'Zimra would be a whole immersion of, like he explained, and let's sum up what we learned. Psukei D'Zimra, where we're invoking the praise, as he called Hallelu. Praise means more than just praise. It means behil, from the word Hallel, Yal Eir, illuminating. So when you, for example, see, I'm using an example used in Ayin Beis and in many places in Chassidus. When you see a great king, but you don't really appreciate what he is, but then you see the ministers that know him well, how they praise him, how they treat him, that inspires you in turn because it gives you a certain sense, a semblance, some type of handle by which to appreciate. Let's say you come into a class and you know that the professor or the teacher or the mashpia is a great teacher. He has a great reputation, but you haven't really experienced it yet. So who do you look at? You look at the veterans. You look at those that have been there, who talk about this teacher, who can explain what the teacher says, and that helps you relate to it. So in a way, the malachim and their praise serve as that type of role models. They're familiar with God. That's why God created angels. That's where they hang out. They hang out in the spiritual domains, and they sing God's praise, not just to praise him, to help us appreciate the qualities, the attributes, the virtues, the chesed, the gvura, the teferes, the netzach, choyd, yisay, the malchus of the divine, which in turn allows us to then relate to it. So think of the angels as these ministers, the ministering angels, they are Malachi Asharis, Malachi Shalom. They serve that role. So when we say Psukkah de Zimra, when we pray Psukkah de Zimra, we're invoking that, and that illuminates, like he says, that radiates, that it also affects this light that you're seeing, that the animal soul, the body and animal soul can also appreciate it. Suddenly you hear this king, for example, this great leader or teacher or king, whatever example you use, is a brilliant teacher. And the Nefesh Habamis is saying, what's so brilliant about him? And when you listen and read the praises of the Malachim, you start appreciating what makes him so brilliant. Like you said before earlier about, let's say, Yesh Ma'ayin, or other concepts. Well, here it's in davening, so it's more emotional. But the point is, they're appreciating it through the Malachim, so the Nefesh Habamis is going to be nispal, going to be affected by it. And therefore, it's going to serve, like he said, like a cherev, reim miskel b'greinom, a cherev pefias, that will serve, that it will come down into the very physical, emotional heart of the person, and serve like a cherev that will cut off and say, it seems so trivial and so inferior for me to be pursuing my material pleasures. So what's the best way to lahachris shinikas achitzenim, to cut off the supply of energy to the animal soul, is by showing it an alternative, something much greater. Instead of playing with little nonsense and immediate pleasures of instant gratification, here you have such a powerful experience. So that, in a sense, cuts off the Nefesh Habamis' interest, or weakens the Nefesh Habamis' interest in material matters. That's how he describes Psukkah de Zimra. And then that leads, as we climb the ladder and we continue this journey, now we're already getting the blessings and Heidah, acknowledging. In other words, first we have to get the Nefesh Habamis, the animal soul and the body's attention to appreciate. And then you can continue to start feeding through bracha v'Heidah. Furthermore, he doesn't go into detail because here's not the place where he wants to explain davening in detail. Here the goal is ultimately to show us how the Nefesh Elikis can turn the Nefesh Habamis into shemen, into oil that will fuel the divine love, the divine fiery love. Okay. Next step. He says, and the Iker, Inyan, where do you then you come even further now that you've gotten the Nefesh Habamis engaged. Then comes the next step, which is the Iker in the two blessings before Shema. And here's how we explain this. Nefesh Habamis, so till now, what we've done is impressed, to use the example, let's say you bring we'll call it a rebellious student who doesn't like to go to class, doesn't like to be taught, but you found a creative way to get his attention. You get his attention, so now he's sitting at least in the classroom and he's learning. He sees and values to some extent the teacher. But you haven't really yet transformed him. You've gotten his attention. Through Psukkah de Zimra and Vayivarach David, you have engaged the animal soul. Now comes the next stage where you're starting to now drill into the very core. What defines the animal soul? So he says the animal soul, we learned, is rooted in the world of Tohu. Tohu is very intense energy. However, without being contained properly and balanced properly, it becomes wild. It's wild energy. So let's use the example I'm saying. You have a rebellious wild guy, a wild kid. You're trying to some way inspire him. So first you get his attention, fine. But now you have to get to the core of where is all his energy coming from? His energy is coming from Tohu, which in turn evolves into the Merkavah. The Pnei Sheir and the Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher, Sheb Merkavah, especially Pnei Sheir, is the root of the animal soul. In the Merkavah, it's Kedusha. Merkavah is a chariot of God's. Like he said from Tehillim, that Elikim, Nikra Rechev Elikim, there it's a very powerful place, but it's bottled to Elikus. The problem is that it's devolved, and come down below. Here it's like a wild animal in the wild, to the point that it could be destructive, aggressive, and so on. You want to harness that aggression and power toward Kedusha. So here comes Birchis Yotzer. Here you're invoking the angels that are higher than Asiya, that we talked about before. Now the angels of Yetzirah and Bria, which is connected to the Merkavah of Pnei Sheir. By doing that, you revealing the Shekhinah that's revealed in these angels. Like he says, Malchus, that in turn gives power to Nefesh Elikis to influence the animal soul, because that's where the animal soul is getting its power from. So in practical terms, it would be in some way trying to channel that intensity of this, we'll call it wild student, wild boy, or wild kid, or wild whoever, adult it could be, and trying to harness it. So the Birchis Yotzer, what it does is, it's drawing from the source of where the behemoth gets its power from. And that's in the Merkavah, which is connected to the Malachim, as we learned here briefly, and as I read yesterday from Ayin Beis, the page where he discusses it a little more at length. Yeah. So that's a subtle transformation of the Malachim as they are exalting God. And same thing below. Yeah. Same thing, Malchus, the Shekhinah is mevaret to B'chinas ban. The Behemoth is B'chayis Makom B'pnei Sheir. So just to bring it out a little more in detail, when you have a Merkavah is a chariot. You have the person who's riding on this chariot. That's the Adam. That's Shema of Tikkun rides on the chariot of the Merkavah of Bria Yetzirah, as he said. So the Merkavah, which is led by, like let's say a chariot that's led by a horse, or by any other animals that are leading it. In this case, the Merkavah itself has four faces, and one of them Pnei Sheir. So you're already talking about a level that is, why can't the person travel on his own? A Merkavah leads a person to a place that they can't go to on their own. That's why king, or the Adam, Elyon, is riding in the chariot. But the chariot is bottled to the Melech. However, from that will evolve ultimately an animal soul that is not a chariot, because the animal soul has its own agenda. But the goal is to turn it into a chariot, that the animal soul should become fuel to lead the Adam Elyon, like we learned before about the korban. That the korban, like food, sustains the person and brings them up to a higher level than they would be on their own. He doesn't say this explicitly, but it just adds to the example of Merkavah and the connection to Nefesh Habamis. So Nefesh Habamis on its own is doing its own thing. You want it to become Shemen, like a Merkavah, Pnei Sheir, to the Adam, which is the human being, or in this case, the Neshama, to what the Neshama's goal is to serve God. Okay, and that sums up what we learned, top of page 373, with a little more, I guess, practical explanation. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them. If not, we shall continue learning inside. Okay. So we're on top of page 373, the new paragraph. Pages can be found on ayinbeis.com, or I'll just read here, even if you don't follow the pages, it'll all should all be explanatory. So now he says like this. However, we find sheyesh koyach b'merkavah yena hanal, that there's a power to this supernal chariot. This chariot we're speaking about, that carries, just like a chariot carries a king. It has power. Even though the Merkavah, which is made up of Pnei Asher, Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher, Pnei Adam, and in this context, it's also connected to the angels, even though they're Nuvroim, we're not talking about Atzilus, we're talking about creatures, Bali Gvul, finite creatures, L'nases u'l'reimim esakisei, the Malchus Shalehem. They have the power to elevate, L'nases, to carry, and l'reimim, to elevate the kisei, the Malchus, the throne of Malchus that's upon this chariot. So they're lower on one hand, but on the other hand, they have the power to elevate, like I explained a few minutes ago. Ki'inyan sha'amar, like we say, v'achayis neses esakise, that the chayis refers to the angels called the chayis, literally means, could be animals, but it also chayis means energy. The chayis hakodesh, the angels that neses, they carry the kisei, the throne. Down below, they cite several sources of where this expression comes from. Chayis neses sakise. I see from Bechaye, from Pirkei Belazar, and in Nusach Ashkenaz, Musaf, they say, okay, V'achayis neses sakise. U'kamei shekasav, like it says in the pasuk, Reimamu. This is Birchis Yotzer. Well, not in the pasuk. In the Birchis Yotzer that we say in this bracha that we're talking about before Shema, we say, Reimu Shaddai. Reimu Mishadai, sorry, Reimu Mishadai. Kamoisha Adam Rechev al Asur Mishadai. That Reimami, from the word Reimami, elevating. Kamoisha Adam Rechev al Asus. Like, for example, when you see a person riding on a horse, this horse carries him and elevates him along the slope of the mountain. On your own, it's harder to climb, harder to go, but you get on a horse, the horse is the thing that leads you and lifts you and elevates you. On the slope of a mountain, for example. Vatam, and what's the reason that the Merkavah is able to do this? The Merkavah l'mayla mebchinas behemis v'chayis mebchinas hatohu shekadam la'adam the Tikkun. And here he connects the two, like I said yesterday. The reason for this is because these behemis and chayis of the Merkavah, the Pnei Sheir, the Pnei Nesher, Pnei Aryeh, have a higher root, much higher, in the behemoths v'chayis, in the level of Tohu. They're rooted in the energy of Tohu, which precedes shekadam la'adam the Tikkun, that precedes the Adam of Tikkun, the one riding on this Merkavah. So even though on one hand they're a lower level, but they're rooted higher, and that's why they have the power to elevate. Going back to the theme he spoke about earlier, why when the neshama comes down below, a tshuva down below, it is able to access the darkness below, accesses Tohu, which is higher than Tikkun, and the neshama gets elevated in the process. As similar to what he said before about food. The Arizal asked the question, why are we dependent on lower species for our sustenance? Medaber is higher than Chayt, Semeach, and Daimim. And yet we see the Medaber, the human being needs, whether it's meat, or vegetables, or minerals to sustain. So he explains because those are rooted in Tohu. That's why they fall lower, because they're rooted higher. So the same idea here. So that's why they have the power to elevate. So when we say in Birchis Yotzer, we talk about the Malachim and the Merkavah, we're talking about these forces that elevate the Adam and therefore there's the animal soul's root that elevates the person to a higher place, and that in turn affects the animal soul in that fashion. Shemezeh hatam. Oh, he's saying exactly what I just said about the food. I didn't realize he's bringing it in the parentheses. Shemezeh hatam, for this reason, that a lower entity is rooted in the higher, yesh koyach b'meichel basar v'tzemeach, there's the power in meat and in vegetables, lahesiv koyach b'meich hachachma, to increase energy in the meich hachachma, even though chachma is higher than them, but they have, because they're rooted in a higher place. U'kamoy kein masha korban behema mechaperes, same thing, the korban behema, when you bring a korban, an offering in the Beis Hamikdash of an animal, mechaperes, it atones, umisakenes, la'odam del nefesh alikis, it repairs for the person the nefesh alikis. You could say the behema is lower than the adam, but because it's rooted in Tohu, it has the power to atone and repair for the adam, the divine soul. V'chein be'birchas hamazon, same thing we see in benching. In Birchas Hamazon we say, Sha'amar v'achalto v'arachta es Hashem. When you will eat uvarachta, meaning the eating brings to a bracha that you would not have without the meal. So the meal leads us to a higher place. Like it says elsewhere. That's the parentheses. Okay. And that's the power of this Merkavah, the power of Birchas Yotzer, the angels and the Merkavah. Any questions?
Rabbi, so is the korban just the symbolic part of our, I mean, it's not just symbolic, it's also the actual korban.
You're talking about today or the time of the temple?
In the time of the temple, and so
that's symbolic. An actual offering was brought from an animal.
Right, and that is the mirror of our nefesh habehemis. That's what we're accessing there through that, and that's why prayer, and we have to.
Prayer replaces those offerings.
Right.
Prayer is the same idea of elevating and offering the animal soul to godliness. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the fundamental teachings of the Alter Rebbe. Many places, Adam Kiyakim Mekem Karmel Hashem, and also Basa Legani, the Yud Shvat, my mom that we learn soon. Very much central point is why Karbonas, the offerings in the Beis Hamikdash, are such a central service, because they represent the elevation of the animal, which is essentially the elevation of materialism, and personally it manifests an animal soul. Yeah. And that's why the Merkavah, there's power in the Merkavah, in the chariot, to elevate the person riding in the chariot. The im kol zeh, Mittler Rebbe continues, and nevertheless, or im kol zeh, with side by side at the same time, also this very fact that it has this power to elevate the throne, it's not because it's its own power, it's because of the divine force that hovers over them, that empowers them. That's why they have this power. It's coming from the divine force. Sha'amar Arin Nesav Nasa. Like we say that the Arin, the ark, its carriers, it carried it. Remember, we learned earlier about the behemoths, then the time that the animals did not follow their own, they followed the Arin, meaning, so the carriers carried it. This is like some type of paradox. She'im neisav nasa lo matzarach sheyinasu. So if let me explain. Simply put, when you carry, let's say, something, so the carrier is carrying the object. It's not the object is carrying the carrier. But it came to the Aron, it wasn't that way. It was the Aron that was in control. In a sense, was using the carriers to take it where it has to go. So who's running the show? So he's saying, the Mittler Rebbe is saying, She'im neisav nasa, lama tzarach she'inasu. So then what do you need the carriers for? If the one that is being carried is the one that's directing it, why do you need people to carry it? So you have to say, bezeh, you have to say in this matter, sheyesh madrega gavayim b'chinas haTohu v'haTikkun, that there's a third level that's higher than Tohu and Tikkun. The animals or the Merkavah is Tohu. The Adam that it's carrying is Tikkun. But there's a third higher level, v'zeu erein sof atzmei sheba'adam. That was the erein sof itself, the infinite divine light in the Adon itself. And that's really the force that's giving the power of the carriers to carry that what they're carrying. So there's really three things here. There's the Merkavah, there's the one that's riding on it or being carried by it, and there's the one that's giving power to the carrier to carry. That's really coming from the Erein Sof Atzmei. That's what he's saying here. So it's not that the ones that carried the Adon had so much power on their own. They were given that power to carry. So who's really calling the shots, so to speak? Who's really doing the carrying? It's the Erein Sof that's doing the real driving force. So you have all factors at work here. You think about it practically, on one hand, when you're riding in a chariot, it's the wagon driver or the person who's riding is telling the Merkavah where to go. Merkavah doesn't go on its own. On the other hand, the Merkavah takes the person, like he said before, with the horse to a place he can't reach on his own. So in other words, the captain of the ship is not as powerful as the ship, but he's the one that tells the ship where to go. But here in this case, the fact that the ship has a power to take the captain and those riding on the ship to a greater place means it's rooted in Tohu. So then who's really the ultimate power here? The ultimate power is a third force that's higher both than the ship and the captain. Both Tohu and Tikkun, higher than both of them. That's the Erein Sof. That's what the Mittler Rebbe is adding here. So in other words, it's not that the animal soul has just this tremendous power of its own. It's coming from a place that's higher than Tohu and Tikkun, that in turn empowers Tohu with his power, that in turn carries the Adam to a higher place, but it's the Adam that actually is the one that brings the carbon, like he said earlier. So you really need all three factors here to make it work properly. I hope you're able to follow that. But this again is very much the Mittler Rebbe style. It's very intricate and needs to be spelled out because he's adding things that he already alluded to earlier, but he didn't spell it out entirely. You may recall when he spoke about the behemoths, he said the behemoth carries the where is it? I think it was on page 367. Let me see something. A moment. Yeah. Beparashanoso on. Okay, I don't want to confuse matters. Fine. Are there any questions? And he says now, this is going back. V'zehu Adam u'behemet teshia Hashem. He brought this earlier on page 370. Let me see. Yeah. It's a combination of Adam u'behemet teshia Hashem. That's God saves. Pirush. Adam u'behema zeh b'chinas ma de Tikkun u'ban de Tohu. Say Adam u'behema, the Adam is ma of Tikkun gematria ma, and behema is ban gematria ban of Tohu. Shegam Tohu kodem the Tikkun, that though Tohu precedes Tikkun, as we learned, nevertheless, who refines whom? So even though the animal soul is rooted, or the ban of Tohu is rooted higher than Tikkun, but it's Tikkun that does the birur. That's mevarer. Like I said, the captain is the one that tells the ship where to go, and it steers and guides us to the right place. V'zeu sheyeshia Hashem la'adam, the Tikkun, and that means teshia Hashem, that Hashem Yeshia helps, supports, empowers Adam the Tikkun b'ma sheboy mishum the Adam Adam le'elyon mamish. Since the Adam comes from the word Adam le'elyon, he's similar to above. He's creating the divine image. So Hashem helps the Adam to get the job done. The animal was not created in the divine image. Doesn't say the Adam was. The animal has divine power, but the one that is most divine-like is the human being, and that's why it's the human that is the one that implements all this work. The Nefesh HaBamis on its own would never reach these levels because it would just follow its own desires. Same thing like you see in a very simple, when you use an animal to plow a field or to ride an animal, it's the rider that tells the animal what to do, not the other way around. So the guiding force is the Shema of Adam, and that's Teshia Hashem. But he's guiding him to help him guide and take the animal and harness and steer the animal where it has to go. The Gama sheyesh b'koyach b'chinas ban de behema lahalis or l'reimim ha'adam, and also this power that we're talking about, that on the other hand, the power that ban of behema of Tohu has to elevate lahalis, to elevate l'reimim, and two words for the word elevate, la'alis or l'reimim, to exalt, to bring to higher ha'adam, the person achakach mitzat shosheh shalamayla ma'adam. So after the adam guides the animal can elevate the person to a higher level that's higher than the adam. V'gam zeh teshia Hashem atzmei shuneisen keich b'hala zu. So the word Teshia Hashem goes both on the human, the Adam, to refine and direct and guide the animal, and it also gives power to Teshia Hashem for the animal, for the ban of the behemoth, to elevate the Adam. So Teshia Hashem goes both on Adam u behemoth. That's what he's saying here, which is consistent with what he said earlier about the two aspects, how the human being is the one that has to bring the carbon. On the other hand, the carbon elevates us to a place we could not reach on our own. And all this comes with the power of God, which is the third power that's higher than Tohu and Tikkun. Just as God gives the power to a human being, levarer lebehema, to refine the animal, kach neisen keich ve'ez, so too, similar to that, he gives power and strength, the b'chinas ban, to the level of ban of the behemoth, sheyala l'mayla m'shema, to elevate higher than the shema of the adam. K'mashikosav tenu oiz lelikim, like it says, tenu oiz lelikim, give strength to God. So what he means saying here is that this oiz is the strength that is giving to ban, tenu oiz lelikim, is giving strength to Elokim, like assuming Elokim is like Gvura, to the bond to elevate higher. And parentheses, some pella adam the tikkun, like it says elsewhere on the pasuk misam pella adam, where it says to Moshe, God says to Moshe, who gave a man a mouth to speak? So it's God that gives the man the mouth to speak. So that power comes from God. Being misam pella adam the tikkun, who gives a man a mouth to speak, the adam of tikkun. God gave the power to the adam to elevate the animal, and gives the power to the animal to elevate even higher. Okay. Any questions?
Jacobson, what you just alluded to also works out in the world of Gematria, because the world of Tohu, Chava, represents Tohu, which Gematria 19. Adam is 45, so the difference is 26, which is Yud Kei Vav Kei. So actually, exactly what you're saying, it comes in the world of Gematria. Chava is, as you know, is a representation of the world of Tohu. That's 19. 45 is Adam, the difference is 26.
Okay.
Now, the question I have is, the difference between Ban and Ma is 7. Is that alluding to the 7 emotional attributes of the animal soul that Adam has been able to rectify? That's why it's 45? That I haven't seen. I'm asking.
I don't know. That you have to look around. I have not seen anything either. Okay.
Thank you.
So now he concludes. Back to Birchas Yotzer. All this was an explanation to explain how the Merkavah of Malachim, the Merkavah work to help soften and impact the animal soul. So he says, "V'zeu atam sheikdimu anshe knesset hagdela." And this is the reason that before Shema, the anshe hagdela proceeded by establishing brichas lebrichas Yotzer. This brachas of Yotzer that we've been reading about, began discussing in the previous page. Shehein halos the malachim, because there's talking about this, the elevations of the malachim. Shemenases esakise, the malachim that carry the supernal divine throne. U'kamei srafim emdim emal loy, like we say the srafim, the fiery angels, emdim, stand memal loy, above him. Memal l'shchina, because they're elevating the shchina. So the reason we say this is because this is the process of how the animal soul elevates. The im kol zeh, and simultaneously, or despite that, or nevertheless, but before they elevate the Adam has to elevate them, as we spoke about earlier. And this is the process that prepares us. The achana. This allows us to have the preparation for Krishma, the Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael that comes afterwards, Shehi, Hanefesh Alikis. Which now Shema, you're already now talking about the divine soul, not the animal soul. Shebasagosa b'yichudei law, in its comprehension of the higher unity that we're going to talk about. And we learned it in Ayin Beis, the higher unity of the divine. Mevareres gam lenefesh habamis. Next page, 374. It also refines the animal soul. Sheyispol gam leiv basar ba'ava rabazu. The goal is that it should also impact the flesh, the heart of flesh, with this tremendous love. Like we say afterwards, with all your heart, with both sides of your heart. Also the Yotzer Hara, the Nefesh Habamis. So basically he's saying that Birchis Yotzer, the Anshe Knesset ideal established to manifest the process of the refinement of this an elevation that comes through this malachim and the Merkavah, which in turn comes through the Adam that does it. So when we say these prayers, when we say Birchis Yotzer, we are drawing down this energy, and in turn it's causing those malachim to elevate, just like it's going to cause us being able to elevate the animal soul. And that will then be a preparation to lead next to the Nefesh Alakis, actual experience of profound love that will impact the animal soul. And this is possible, dafka, specifically because we first preceded the Birchis Yotzer of the Malachim. Va'achar kach Ahavas Olam, and then the second bracha after Birchis Yotzer is Ahavas Olam Ahavtonu. The second bracha now is referring to before Shema. You have loved us. The koi ben neshama sheyuchli liyachid yichudi lo b'Shema Yisrael. That's referring to the souls after the Malachim, that they should be empowered with this love to miyachid yichudi lo, to experience the higher level of unity, Shema. And then will come the Shema. So now he's adding why we say Ahavas Olam. That gives the neshama the power to reach the level of Shema. Like it says elsewhere, so we know it says, in the halacha it says, that when a person feeds, mealtime, you feed your animal first. Why? That's referring to the ban of the animal soul, the Birchis Yotzer, the Merkavah, the Pnei Sheir. So that comes first. You have to first begin with the animal, feed the animal. Va'achar kach, which is the Pnei Sheir, the Malachim, yeah. Then comes Yechel Meichel Adam. Then comes the feeding yourself. The Adam is fed. Shehu Nefesh Alikisha Mevaredes Nefesh Habamis B'Krishma Canal. So that's Ahavas Olam. That's feeding the neshama, which in turn will lead to Krishma, which refines the animal soul in Krishma. So that's the order that he just described. So it's preparing the animal soul. So Psukkah de Zimra does what? That cuts off the supply. It gets the animal soul's attention. Vayivarech David is a bracha. Then comes Birchis Yotzer. You're invoking the source of the animal soul, the Merkavah, feeding the animal. Then you start feeding the neshama, and that will lead into Shema, which we're going to learn next. What is Shema exactly? And how Shema ultimately is going to bring to V'ahavta b'chol levavcha b'shnei yitzarecha. That's the step-by-step process that he's referring to here. So we stop here at the end of the paragraph on top of 374. Okay. Any questions? Okay. So let's stop here, top of